Right, where to start? Bet you need to know where it all began and the context of where we all started, not just me, but everyone. It's probably best places before we even got here. God, must be a couple of 100 years ago now. The planet was, that's Earth, sorry, home planet, was in real trouble. The cycles of warming and cooling, countries, people, too many, just everything had grown too much, too fast, in all the wrong directions. Governments knew what needed to be done. There was no dystopian future or dystopian present that drove it all. Just simple capitalist financial approach where corporations took over. Governments rightly introduced legislation, but didn't have the finances to put the legislation into place, and slowly eroded the control of countries and regions to corporations. Corporations then, in all but name, managed countries, managed resources within those countries, and then in amongst all of this kind of control of the masses, resources started to become scarce, technology was advanced, a few crackpot scientists put together an idea, and a couple of corporations formed a conglomerate, and hey presto, shebang. But at the time, money, cost, sheer bloody just do not care about other people approach meant that people were shipped here because in the most cost-effective way, because they weren't sure if they decided to start throwing asteroids and meteors and other rocks around, that if they flung them too close to Earth, they'd hit. So the closest operational base that could create a buffer and mitigate any mass extinction events, the colony was developed on Mars. This fantastic idea was extremely sensible. Create a manufacturing hub that every now and then, well, every 9 months, you could swing close to, ship goods from and to, skilled personnel, basically anything that you needed to get done, you could get done. You could build and refine your materials and ship it back. At this point where space was a premium on Earth, cities were starting to become monoliths of mountainous proportions. They sensibly set up the colony. So from the start, it was going to be an idealistic sort of utopia, contradicting myself, because nature never goes to utopian or dystopian results, but it was the sort of colony, sort of land of milk and honey approach, but they shipped off the unskilled labour with the machinery and the bulk of the materials needed to establish, and then the second colonizing transport 9 months later had the more technical and skilled people that were going to be dealing with it. Now, that all sounds great, but to get everyone there cheaply, you're still spending a lot of time in space. So they decided to create a biological approach, which was to mitigate the radiation issue by quite literally just creating a trigger in the body. Wouldn't cut off producing skin cells, creating an absorptive layer, creating essentially what is nowadays called the hardbacks. Now, hardbacks, or HBs as we're called, were never meant to be here. We were meant to be the first kind of generational sacrifice, where people sacrifice for their family, but in the first manufacturing wave, they didn't deem it appropriate to send the medical equipment to allow people to remove the genetic modification, because there wouldn't be the shelter facilities to reduce the radiation intake that would be developed later. Just layering up enough material over the habitable areas. It took longer than planned, admittedly, but essentially, with everything that went on, what would be the working class, just were denied the access to the medical equipment through one and another, and has allowed a culture to exist where the corporations have the workforce that is capable of working in high radiation levels, allowing manufacturing to be streamlined, faster. Downside is you have quite literally taken 2/3 off the lifespan of pretty much the entire colony. And created a class system that can never be violated, because you're technical, you're wealthy, you're funded, they're connected, you name it, they all managed to get medical equipment, so they didn't pass the genetic safety on to the next generation. And you now have the original silverskins, or OSs. So you've got HBs and OSs, and it doesn't matter what you call the whole situation. It's servitude done on a capitalist scale that, as a friend once said to me, what is slavery if not having nothing to spend on yourself at the end of the month? Capitalism, slavery, servitude, they're all different approaches for different generations to to keep the masses in a situation where the minority prosper. It would be fairly straightforward, and I wouldn't be sitting here trying to work out how to explain the mess I'm in. So everything ticked on. There were riots and civil unrest and atrocities and funding that created faulty or shipment of faulty equipment that created massacres and loss of life and everything that can go wrong in a situation that, you know, you leave a light bulb on, it can kill 50 people. That is the environment in which you find yourself. The pain of it is but humans create most of the pain. And it was humans for about 80 years we've been here. It was about 80, I think it was the 83 Uprising. That would have put, the first declaration would have been in about 82, Establishment 82, where the sort of second or third generation OSs decided that the tithe that the corporation exerted upon the colony was unfair, and they were changing the terms and the pricings and the costings of shipments, to which under corporate law or any contractual law was breach, and they shipped out on the next transport a contingent of military personnel, I think would be the best, with top of the range equipment, survive any vacuum, and they landed hard. And the people that, the OSs, the Silverskins, they managed to shrug their shoulders and avoid the penalties. In the workforce, work got doubled, more time in radiation-rich manufacturing areas just because of lack of shielding. The death rate, the work rate, the fatigue, everything went up. Not having an inhibitor on skin growth, it just creates a monstrous amount of weight. Not to mention the malformation of venal structures, the stress on the heart. Heart attack is pretty much the main cause of death. It's just, basically, it took away the parents of generations. You know, it took away a culture. How can you have a culture when, you know, by the time you're 25, your children don't have long enough to build a culture of you being there. It just breaks your heart. Breaks the spirit. And you don't know how to rebuild. And it's those aspects of the corporate shackles that people, naive children, have played and taunted and then managed to not pay the price, which left the colony in greater debt, and you had security skins, or security silver skins, or the SSs, basically, that came in, putting, essentially squeezing all SHBs into one tiny space. Expansion, all it did was create even worse problems. Filtration units, HEPA filters, everything collapsed under the strain. Deaths. It was only when their workforce was under threat and productivity was dropping did they actually step in and do something about it. And then roll forward another 50 years, and that's where I came in. And I'm one of the handful of exceptions to what the medical treatment in relation to the genetic trigger that was put into the original settlers, that I basically started to exhibit, and I started off life as a privileged citizen and soon found myself cast out. Puberty's a bitch, ain't it? I don't know how, but yes.